Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us today. You just joined She Can Code's live webinar called The Art of Saying No and Setting Boundaries at Work. I'm your host for today, Kaylee Batesman, the Content Director at She Can Code. For those tuning in who aren't familiar with us, She Can Code is a collaborative community working together to tackle the tech gender gap. You can join our community platform to find a supportive network of like-minded individuals, new opportunities and guidance to help you to excel in your tech career. Now, before I introduce our speakers, please note that we have a live Q&A session running today. So please submit your questions throughout and we will try and get to them at the end. So let's kick off with my wonderful guests for today. I'm lucky to have 4 guests today. I have Nicola Riley, Principal Consultant at Zühlke, Steve Harrison, Managing Principal Consultant at Capco, Emma Dean, Chief Operations Officer at SMG, and Hazel Elms, Sales Manager at Women in Business and Tech Expo. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to my wonderful panel. Thank you all for being on here. Can I kick off with some background about each of you, please, to set the scene for our audience today? Emma, should we start with you?
Hi, yes, I'm Emma, COO at SMG. So SMG, we are leaders in connected commerce marketing. We've been around for 15 years. I joined when we were a startup, so in-house with one of our retailers at the time. Have had experience on our commercial side of the business and things grow through those years as the industry's grown as well. More recently, I sit in our central teams looking after people and marketing and new business, and our business has definitely grown into the tech industry. So I wouldn't have said I was entered this world, tech world, in my early career, but we definitely now are in that space now that technology is what powers, and our tool plan app specifically powers a lot of the big connected commerce marketing discussions within retailers and brands across the UK.
Wonderful. And I love the said that you was there from a startup. That takes a certain type of person want to work at a startup. So definitely. Hazel, yourself, should we go to you?
Hi everyone. I'm Hazel, Sales Manager at the Women in Business and Tech Expo series of events, and we're the UK's #1 event for gender diversity recruitment and retention as well. So we work with lots of organisations across all sectors on business and tech. So tech has a really big element to our events. We hold an event in London, we hold an event in Manchester, which will be our first one this year in June as well. So really excited. And I've started working in tech and STEM industries. I've been working in gender diversity now for about 8 years. I was at a gender diversity jobs board before joining these events. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here and really share my knowledge and opinions, really.
Amazing. And for anybody listening if you haven't been to Women in Business and Tech Expo before, sign up. It's incredibly busy and a really good show. We go and we absolutely love it. It's very, very good show. So do sign up if you haven't already. Steve, should we go to you?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve. So I'm Managing Principal at Capco. I'm also, I guess, a solution architect day-to-day in terms of the job and the roles I take. Capco is a management consultancy. It works exclusively in financial services, and I've been here for about 10 years or so. At Capco, I'm part of the senior UK technology leadership team. Technology is about getting on for 200 people here in the UK. For Capco, we work very closely with organisations like She Can Code and Women in Technology to ensure our diversity is good. And that covers lots of skill sets like engineering, architecture, product ownership, things like that. As I mentioned, I've been here about 10 years. Prior to that, I spent the 10 years before that at university, where I did a master's and a PhD in astrophysics. So an academic route into technology and working in technology services, but one that I hope has helped diversity at Capco for sure.
Yeah. So you graduated and you went to Capco and you've been there 10 years. They must be doing something right to keep you.
Yes, they're doing something. They're doing something to keep me. I should have also mentioned actually part of sort of our background in academia, or myself and my colleague, we created and own the PhD graduate hiring at Capco, and historically that's always had one of the strongest sort of diversity pools within Capco, and something obviously we're very proud of and have been since day one. But we're always looking for opportunities to improve on that.
Yeah, Incredible. And Nicola, last but not least.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Nicola Riley. I'm a principal consultant at Zühlke. My kind of area of specialism is around delivery. So that means helping to work with our clients to deliver the kind of digital products and services that they need for their customers. It's a Swiss company, so you may or may not have heard of us, but we have offices in the UK, in London and Manchester, and in Edinburgh. So yeah, I've had a bit of a squiggly career, I guess, getting here. So I've worked in education, in art and design education. I've worked in the higher education sector, worked in government in energy and education, and kind of ended up working or getting drawn towards the excitement of building digital products and services. And that's how I got into the consultancy.
Wonderful. We love it when somebody says they have a squiggly career. That is what most of the ladies in our community say. They've got a squiggly career, and we love the weirder the route, the better, particularly when ladies share their journeys in. So you are not the only one. There are lots of them in our community. Panel, we have lots to talk about today. We have lots to cover, so we're going to get cracking. We're going to talk a little bit today about setting healthy boundaries at work. So we're going to kick off with, how do you differentiate between setting healthy boundaries and being seen as uncommitted in the workplace? Nicola, should we go to you first on that one? How do you think you can set a healthy boundary and still be seen as committed?
Sure. So yeah, thinking about this question, it's a bit of a weird connection, I think, to make between boundaries and not being committed. And so in my head, I like to split the two apart and reframe it really to think that if you're setting boundaries, what do you get from that? And I think you're getting realistic expectations about what you can achieve and what you can do and how you can do that. You're setting achievable goals for yourself and your organization and your teams. And you're making really clear your commitments to everyone and how you're going to do that and when you can do that. So actually you are committed. You're showing how you're going to be committed and how you're going to show up and deliver. And so for me, it's really important to have those clear boundaries. For yourself, it means you can have really clear goals. You know what you're trying to achieve. You can kind of be honest with yourself about what you're committing to those and achieving them, but also sharing those with others. I think it makes you more likely to hit your goals and your commitments because you've thought about them. You've kind of decided you've decided that you can commit to them. And it's going to be more satisfying when you achieve them. And boundaries help you do that. I think it also makes you more effective because if you set good boundaries, you know what you can do, when you can do it. It means you're going to be more effective with your time and how you spend your time. And again, that's going to add satisfaction. And I also think it shows that you're committed. It also means you're not papering over cracks and trying to do lots of stuff where there are actually gaps that need to be filled. So I think that's an important thing not to do. So ultimately, I think it's better for you, but it's also better for your people around you, your teams, your organization, because I guess we all want to work with that person who is clear about what they can do, when they can do it, what their boundaries are, so you know how to work really well with them. And it makes teams healthy. You can rely on each other. You're really clear about what each other's boundaries are. I think that shows that you've got that commitment. You're committing to your team, your organization, the work that you're looking to deliver. And it's in no way a sign that you're not committed.
Yes, I love that. Yes, that you're actually more committed by being clear about your boundaries in the workplace instead of, you mentioned being realistic, that you could just, go throughout your work career not being realistic about what you can actually do and achieve, and even not delegating to other people and not, being able to say no sometimes, then you'll just, end up burning out and not actually achieving what you were there to achieve in the first place. I love that. Steve, yourself, what do you think? How do you differentiate between setting healthy boundaries and being seen as uncommitted?
I think
you just pointed out there, actually maybe the two don't go together.
Yeah, and I'm conscious Nicola is also a consultant, and consulting is a service industry, and therefore dealing with clients day to day. can pose its challenges. You know, clients aren't always necessarily reasonable in their demands when they're, you know, paying for managed services. And we have to manage those situations, and that to a degree comes with experience and time and sort of learning how that works. I think the best thing I try to do day to day is to set a good example for those around me. You know, I'm conscious that I've been in this quite a long time now, and I've fallen foul of certain situations where I've let those boundaries go, but I've also learned how to manage those situations moving forward. And, you know, I'm now in a situation where I manage lots of teams quite often. So I try to set the best example I can to them. And I also try to provide a degree of coverage for them in managing those situations where maybe I'm the person who is best able to, you know, and certainly in consulting situations, you know, it's about showing good behaviors and setting good examples for those around you, particularly the next generation who will at some point take over from us.
Yes, and I find that as well. That's such a good point, especially practice by behavior, because you are right. People around you get a feel for whether it's okay to book holiday and take time for yourself and things like that. If you're not doing it and they don't see that it's okay to take time for yourself and to shut off as well during that holiday period and not do anything that is work related during that holiday period, if they see you online and still, you know, sending the odd message, I think, am I expected to be like that? So you're absolutely right, setting an example and just being more mindful of, you know, people do follow suit is a really good point. Emma, yourself, I can see you smiling like you're agreeing.
Yeah, that last point definitely resonates with me. I remember a moment when, as we all are busy, we go off on holiday, like you were saying, kind of, and you feel that sense of guilt for going away and kind of leaving the office and saying, right, if you need me, just text me or call me or whatever. And you feel like you're doing the right thing. And I remember my boss at the time saying to me, what did you say that for? Why did you say that? Because that you've ultimately you set that expectation of that's what they need to do when they go on holiday. And you've also suggested that this workplace can't continue without you, and you're not kind of showing that trust. And I think that really resonated with me, and I don't do that anymore. And I'm very mindful of kind of like, I'm going to go away now, and I expect when you go away to do the same, to absolutely switch off. And you, like you were saying, Nikki, you come back and you're going to be refreshed, you're going to be better for it. And it also shows that you hold respect and give responsibility, and you trust the people you work with. And I think that's really, really important. So I don't do that anymore when I go for a holiday.
Yes, yeah. Even if it seems unnatural to you, it was almost like you had to make that conscious decision. You know what? I almost feel like I don't want to be doing this, and I want to still be online, and I want to respond to things, but I have to be mindful of how other people are seeing that, and I want the team to feel like they can take time off and refresh. So even if you feel really unnatural having to do it, it's better for everybody in the long run, surely.
Absolutely, I agree.
Hazel, yourself, what about you? How do you differentiate between setting healthy boundaries and being seen as uncommitted in the workplace?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything everyone said, and I think it's really that clear communication for me. Really, is to really talk about it and not take things on. And I've been guilty of this in the past, where you take things on and you don't say anything, and you're like, oh, I'll just do that, and then you can start to get that feeling of being slightly overwhelmed, or there's too much to do. You might have taken something on that's actually going to impact another part of work that you're working on. And actually, with those clear communications and saying, actually, I can do that, but that's going to have to wait, or I'm working on this at the moment, like setting timescales in terms of when you can do it. It might not be instantly, but it's that communication piece for me, I think, that really then demonstrates that, you know, you're not uncommitted and you want to be able to do it and you want to help, but it's setting those boundaries, I think. And actually from a wellbeing piece as well, because I think, you know, it can, if you take on too much, your quality of work might go down a little bit because you're trying to juggle everything. But also teamwork. I think if you're working in a team, and, you know, Stephen's kind of touched on that in terms of taking responsibility for things and helping out, but actually, can it be shared out between a team as well? And again, that communication piece between a team, it might be that you're working on your own, but if things can be shared out, things might get done a little bit quicker as well.
Yeah, and I find as well, I completely agree with you there, taking on too much and also not being able to say no to things that you probably can't do anyway. I mean, you said then that was a perfect example of, yes, I could help you, but maybe not at this moment in time, or, you know, I'm going to be doing some deep in thought work until 2 p.m. Maybe we'll talk after 2 p.m. and kind of setting that boundary there. But also there are those people that don't know how to say no to something that they don't really know how to do anyway. And really, you just need to say, I'm not the right person for that. And maybe let's, you know, we can work together to find the right person, perhaps, instead of taking on too many tasks that you know you're not going to do a good job, or it's really not for you anyway, or somebody's dumped something on you thinking you're the right person. So it's almost that as well, being very clear about what you're good at and why people should come to you for the things that you're really good at. But I suppose that's easier said than done sometimes, isn't it? When you want to, especially if you're new somewhere as well and you're wanting to show enthusiasm for taking on everything, it's not the easiest.
No, definitely. And I think, you know, everyone's different as well, aren't they? And some people are naturally like, yes, I want to do that. I want to help, but not at the detriment of kind of yourself and your well-being. I think is important.
Yeah, yeah. We're going to talk about some examples of setting boundaries. So, Steve, can we go to you? Can you provide examples of boundary setting techniques that you have worked well for you personally or within your organisations?
Sure thing. So in the run-up to this, I've spent a lot of time thinking about answering this question in the sort of hope that I would find a silver bullet and a magic answer to this question that I could just tell everyone and the world would be a better place. Unfortunately, I haven't. So I've ended up going down quite a philosophical route. I think ultimately, boundary setting has to start with you as the individual, as the human. And before the boundary is set, you have to derive the value that it comes from. Like for you as a person, what do you value? Like in terms of your well-being, your free time, your work-life balance, your professional life, where do your values sit in that sort of multi-dimensional space? From those values that you inherently then stick to and have inherent to you, you set your boundaries, and you also set the flexibility of those boundaries, how much you're willing to flex on them, when you're willing to flex on them, for how long you're willing to flex on them, and the things you won't flex on. And so the boundaries, yes, they exist, but they come from something more fundamental. And I think like the important thing to me, at least, is people shouldn't feel bad about having boundaries, and they shouldn't feel apologetic. And I've been in too many situations where people are almost apologizing for having that boundary or saying no. I don't believe in any of that, to be honest. Like I'm like, no, because in my mind, you wouldn't feel apologetic or bad about having the internal value, which says you value your well-being. So why would you therefore feel bad about setting the boundary, which it like ensures that happens? So I think it's about understanding what's important to you, setting those boundaries and working out what's flexible, like dependent on environments, and then not being apologetic about it. You know, obviously you need to communicate it, but you don't feel bad. And you should be strong and like feel proud that you're setting an example to those around you. And like I said, I've been here 10 years. I've been very lucky in that I've very rarely been in situations where it's really pushed my sort of limits of well-being around boundaries. And you know, I've thankfully up to now had a fairly successful career. So it's possible, and people need to know it's possible and not have to believe they have to compromise every aspect of their life to be successful in an industry like technology. But you just have to start on the right track with values that are true to you, you know, and I think that is the most important thing. And it's about self-awareness, you know, understanding when your boundaries are being pushed, understanding when at a subconscious level you're flexing without realizing it, and before you know it, you're working late hours every day and you're sort of renormalizing, rebaselining every week in your head, and then having the self-awareness to draw that back in and realign with your values. So slightly philosophical answer, because unfortunately there isn't a magic bullet for this.
Yeah, I completely agree with starting with the value part, because I think sometimes as well that can come down to how much you value your own time as well. And you said there about when you're really being pushed, and sometimes you don't even know when your boundaries are being pushed. I find that sometimes I've been at companies where they just love to have meetings for the sake of having meetings, and you have to push back sometimes and think, is there any value in me actually being on this meeting, or is it just they've called a lot of people in and maybe I have nothing to contribute to that meeting? So you almost have to push back in a nice enough way where it doesn't seem like you're uncommitted, but you really do value your time throughout the working day. And it's just finding a way to communicate that with your colleagues instead of them assuming that you'll sit on every 1 hour meeting throughout the day and have no other time to do anything, which sometimes can be quite hard to navigate. Emma, yourself, do you have any boundary setting techniques that have worked well for you? How do you navigate that in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's no silver bullets, and we're all guilty of letting those boundaries slip sometimes. But I think the things that help me are using your calendar really well. So making sure I use a Reclaim app to kind of get some time back. I don't know if anyone else uses that. Kind of, it basically holds little bits in your diary where you've got gaps between meetings, so you can actually have that time to breathe and make sure you're kind of giving yourself time to think about the next meeting and follow up from the one before. I make sure I'm really clear on where I'm going to be each week. So kind of, if I'm at home, I've got childcare responsibilities, I'm really clear on that, and the days I'm going to be in, so people can see when they can get me in person versus kind of virtually. And that meeting piece is a big one, isn't it? I think we have periodically times when we come back to kind of our meeting culture slipping again. We need to look at how we address it, and we kind of have meetings back to back, and we go, does everyone need to be in those meetings? Can we make those meetings shorter? How do you make them more effective? And I'm practically trying it each week to remove myself from meetings. And I think it comes back to that point again around showing that I don't need to be in that. There's a lot of people in that room that can do that job, that I can find out and get the kind of keynotes afterwards, or I can feed in beforehand, but trying to be really practical about kind of and strict about which meetings to go to, not just going along with a tie because you've been added onto that invite. People think it'd be nice for you to be there, like trying to be clear about kind of your time, how you're going to use that.
Exactly. And you mentioned there as well about people knowing where you are at what times, because that works both ways. It's not just so you feel more comfortable that people know where you are, but it's also that people know when they can get hold of you and when not to expect you online. And setting those healthy boundaries is just better for the whole team as a whole, because they're not sitting there thinking, where's Emma? She's been missing for several hours, and actually you blocked out that time.
Yeah, and I think coming back to the point that was made earlier around setting the right precedent as well. Like we have a really a great policy. A hybrid working policy means you can work from where you want, when you want, as long as you get your job done, effectively. But people often say, but I don't see my manager doing that, so I can do that. We need people to demonstrate that they're doing it so the whole team can do it. And so I practically will put things in my diary like going swimming with Daniel, taking my child to school. I'll put those things in to show that my diary is being used for my personal reasons as well, and being really open about that. And I think it gives people the confidence and to know that they can do that too.
Yes, that transparency. Yes, I agree. Nicola, yourself, do you have any boundary setting techniques like that at all that you use?
Yes, I work with teams a lot, so I was thinking about this from a team perspective, and I think it's already been touched on, like being really clear from the start and communicating what your boundaries are really important. And we quite often use something like a user manual of me, which you may have heard of. If not, you can Google it. There's loads of really great information. I didn't create this, I've borrowed this, but it's a great tool, and you can use it and kind of structure it in different ways, so it fits for your team. But it's a chance for everyone to say how they like to work. So not just what hours they work, because some of the logistics, but also how they like to give feedback or receive feedback, and what communication style or channels work best for them, kind of how they manage their time. And you can kind of put any questions in really that help people to share how they want to work and be really clear with others, so that everyone in the team has an understanding of the different ways we work, the different boundaries we have, and can kind of try their best to really accommodate those and work with people. So that's a really good tool. If you haven't seen it, have a look. It's it's a really nice way to get teams talking to each other about this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's
And
a really
then,
and feedback is so important. I'm pleased you touched upon that, because people do want to receive and give feedback in different ways, especially when it's coming from your boss. That is a boundary sometimes that you do have to set. So yeah, that's a really good point to have touched upon.
yeah, and you can use it for yourself, even if you're not in a team, just to help you think about what your boundaries are. And then some small things as well. I totally agree with Steve on not apologizing. Like, don't apologize for sticking to your boundaries, particularly when you've communicated. That's really important. But also those small things, like if you use something like Teams or Slack, you can mark yourself out for lunch and put an emoji on there, so it's really visual and clear that you are out. And blocking that focus time and take it, and just do those things that make it clear to everyone where you are, but take that time that you need and stick to your boundaries, and don't feel bad about it. We should all be doing it.
It's amazing how just setting your status on your teams can make you feel slightly calmer. Sometimes I'll walk out for lunch and I'll just say out for lunch, or I've gone to the bank or wherever. And just setting that message just puts me peace of mind that my team know that if they need me in the next 5-10 minutes, I'll be back. And you can shut off then a little bit, instead of thinking, somebody's wondering where I am. So you're right, just setting a little status message to say where you are can actually really change that 20 minutes walk wherever you go for lunch. Hazel, what about you? Do you have any boundary setting techniques that you use throughout your working day?
Yeah, definitely. And working within events and the events industry, there are always times where the workload increases on the run up to an event and also after. So it varies different times of the year depending on where we are in the event cycle. But for me, in the really hectic times, and when we're a couple of months out from our Manchester event now, so things are really gearing up in terms of the marketing and all the exhibitors and sponsors getting everything ready. So it's a really busy time. And for me personally, I love a list. So if I have a list and I can prioritize actually out of that list what really needs doing, that calms me and it focuses me in terms of what I need to do and my boundaries, and actually what can roll over to the next day, what is it that needs doing now. And if I have that list, and it's quite a visual thing for me as well, to be able to look down and tick it off, then that works for me. And that's kind of how I manage my time and the boundaries in a busy period, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely, because your shows are huge and you have to be obviously so organized as a team. It must be quite overwhelming. We've seen your team running around before at those events, and we think it must be so overwhelming. We run small events, but to run your big events, you must have to be very organized with your checklist and to set those boundaries that you don't burn out as well by the time the show actually comes around.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just busy. I love the buzz that you get working on events and working with everybody and seeing people face to face, especially following COVID and coming out of COVID and events starting again. It's just a dream to be able to be holding them. And you just want to make sure that you're not missing anything, but at the same time you do have to be aware of those boundaries and actually your working day, and that you don't burn out. So prioritizing for me is in those lists is the way it works for me.
Yes, yeah, that's really good advice. I wanted to talk a little bit about how you say no, because obviously it's not the easiest thing to communicate to a colleague. Emma, can we go to you on that? How can individuals navigate saying no without fearing negative repercussions on their career progression?
Yeah, a few things we again touched on, I think, already, but where firstly would be about reframing no's into kind of something more positive. I think one of our values, one of our behaviours, at SMG is about championing positivity, and if I need to say no something, it's always for a very good reason, and therefore talking about what that reason is and why I'm putting my priority and what that means will be how I go about framing that. I was thinking about kind of how we make those decisions. We obviously have like most businesses, very clear kind of plans, objectives and strategies around how we're going to deliver against that across the months ahead. And when we talk about defining our strategies, we say strategies are choices. It's about what you're going to do in favour of what you're not going to do. And so if I'm not doing something, it's because I'm doing this, and that's where I'm going to add the most value or deliver the best kind of for this company or for what we're trying to achieve as a group. So I think talking about it in that way is always how I go about it. And I think it's obviously the audience sometimes can make it more difficult. I.e., if you are having that discussion with your line manager, that may feel more challenging. You're thinking about career progression and does that impact kind of what this looks like on me, how it reflects on me. I think I'd very much encourage people to think about it's a really positive behaviour and attribute to be able to be really decisive and have a clear clarity around what you're doing and how you're going about it. And I think, you know, you can frame it in that way about if I do this now, if I don't do this, then I can do this, this and this by this day, and this is how I'm going to do it really effectively. Another thing I think we touched on there was around being clear on kind of what it is that someone is asking about, because sometimes someone's asking something for the wrong reason. Like you were saying, Katie, it might be you're not the right person for it, therefore you can reframe and go, I'm not, but I help you to find the right person that is, or I'll give you the materials that will help you get there. So you can often turn that no into a yes that way by giving someone else another kind of helpful response. But I also would think about trying to get to the kind of crux of why that person is asking to do something. Often there's a motivation behind it, which if you dig into, the brief isn't quite what it needs to be, and that person actually might require something different from what they're actually asking you on the surface, and you can actually deliver that in a different way and be just as helpful or as effective without having to do exactly what they've requested of you. And I think I'd really be digging into kind of what is it they're trying to get to, and how can I best help without kind of eroding away at what I need to be doing as well.
Yes, definitely, because I think that leads in as well to, I can see a question in here about somebody is asking, they seem to be the only person that seems to set and stick to boundaries in their team, and they often feel pressure to push boundaries. Do you have any tips on being strong? And I suppose it's not always about being strong, is it? It's actually what you just said there about maybe reframing if somebody asks you to do something and saying, you know what, it's not a strong, I have to be strong to say, no, I'm not going to help you with something, you're pushing on my boundaries. You could just reframe that and say, you know what, I can still help you and find somebody else or work with you to find the right solution, but maybe I'm not the right person for this. But I think there is always that misconception that you have to be very strong to turn around and say no. No is a complete sentence, as I say, and that is it. But that's not always the right answer in the workplace.
No, and I saw that question that in the chat box as well about how do you say it to a colleague. Sometimes that's some more difficult
rather than a boss.
Yeah, yes. Because there is someone you're kind of really chatty with and got a good relationship with, and saying no to them might feel quite pointed. But again, I think it's helpful to kind of really kind of have a conversation about like, what is it that you're trying to get to, and how can I help in a way that maybe you haven't identified yet, that might be different to what you've originally kind of put forward. And I think you can often have a more relaxed conversation that way to help kind of move that forward. So yeah, I appreciate that the audience always makes it a bit more difficult to think about kind of how I'm going to frame it.
Definitely, yes. Nikki, I can see you nodding in agreement there. How do you find yourself saying no to things and still helping people, but in a nice way, saying no?
Yeah, I think just building on what Emma said really is that it's having that honest conversation, and that it might be a no that you can't do that thing, but maybe you could stop doing something else, and that gives you the space to pick up something else. So it might be a conversation around priorities, like what's the most important thing to do, what should I step back from, and then I can help with this thing. Or if it's a difficult conversation, maybe saying like, if I do this thing, here are the consequences of that. I can see this not being achieved, or this will be dropped. Like, is that what we want? How could we solve that problem? And really kind of opening up the no to a really nice, honest conversation about what the options are, who can help. There's usually a way to get something done, and it might not mean that you have to do it, but you can help find the solution and explore that.
Definitely, yes. It's just finding a way. So as well, it's learning how to best work with your team and how they communicate as well. And that can take some time. You're not going to know that from day one, obviously. So sometimes it's just learning about your team and how they work. Steve, you obviously know your team very well. You've been there 10 years, so you obviously communicate with them quite well. How do you say no when you need to without fearing that it will have any impact on your career progression?
I think there's part of me, maybe slightly surprisingly, that has sort of just come to terms with accepting it has a little bit. You know, and don't get me wrong, I feel extremely lucky and privileged to have had the career at Capco so far that I've had. I've joined at a time when it was small and it's now big, and I've managed to ride that wave through. And I suspect that maybe working shorter hours than I could have pushed myself to work, and maybe saying no sometimes when I could have said yes, has maybe impacted me to a degree. But I think with perspective over 10 years, the difference that has had is vastly outweighed by the benefits it has given me in terms of mental well-being, better work-life balance, more opportunity, you know, to look after myself and my body and my mind, and all of the stuff that brings. Now, could I have had another promotion in 10 years if I'd have worked till 8 or 9 every night? Probably. But do I mind? Not really. So I think there are elements, I think, like Nikki said, elements of understanding the consequences sometimes of saying no. And I think something a few of us have said is it's also understanding that and being okay with it and being unapologetic about it, and you know, reviewing the problem space as a positive, which is look at all of the benefits I've gained over that time by having that time. You know, not everything needs to be measured in terms of career progression, you know, in terms of our welfare and things like that. So it's about reframing and understanding, yeah, you know, sometimes choices do have consequences, both positive and negative, but we as human nature tend to focus on negative, whereas actually what we would need to be doing is focusing on the positive consequences of our choices.
Yes, definitely. And you mentioned working late there and whether or not you should go on and work late. I can see a brilliant question in there. Someone has said, my manager loves to chat most days, which is fine for half an hour, but these meetings sometimes go on for hours. Do you have any advice on how to basically say, I've got a hard stop at such and such a time? And that can happen, especially at the end of the day, if you're thinking I need to go somewhere, or if you have children, you might need to go and pick somebody up, and that's quite difficult when that's a boss, isn't it? You know, it's kind of, you do have to set those boundaries. And like you said, if you're not working till 8 or 9 o'clock at night, that's okay too. And you don't have to apologize for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, sorry, just to, I guess, extend that a little bit. Consulting historically, at least in financial services, has a bit of a reputation, or did have a bit of a reputation for long hours, you know, working yourself to exhaustion, so on and so forth. And that's an almost a legacy thing. We as an organization have worked very hard to try and bring consulting into the modern age, as it were. You know, I chair a lot of our performance management meetings for a lot of our specialist skill sets, so I sort of invigilate all of them. And one of the things we always prepare people for in the briefing is, you know, the hours someone works is not an indicator of how well we should rate their performance. It is like, that should not be discussed. It should not matter, you know, and it's going to take a little while to embed those kind of thought processes and behaviors into some people who've maybe been in the industry a lot longer. But it will never happen unless we start to make it happen.
Yes, definitely. Yes, it definitely isn't an indicator of how hard you're working, how many hours you are working. Just it's more what you do in those hours, and whether you say yes to all of those meetings that you don't need to be in, and you've run out of time to do what you need to do, and find yourself working till 9 o'clock at night. We're going to move on because we're going to run out of time. But Hazel, I wanted to go to you a little bit about leadership and tying in with setting an example and being able to say no. But can you share insights on the role of leadership in promoting a culture that encourages healthy boundaries and work-life balance? We've touched upon this a little bit about setting a good example. But what do you think? What are your insights on the role of leadership and healthy boundaries?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. And I've worked with many employers over the years in terms of culture and creating an inclusive culture and the benefits that brings to an organisation. And the culture within an organisation doesn't come down to one person. It comes down to many people, and setting that culture and actually being led from the top down. So as a leader within an organisation, I think it's really important for those leaders to be setting an example for their employees, for their teams, and, you know, the leaders that are creating those cultures, you know, they might be leaving, they might be working flexibly, they might be leaving at 5 and saying, I'm going to go and pick up my children, or go and do the school run, coming back and logging back on later, and that's okay. And for those examples, that means for the employees that culture is set, if that makes sense. So I know everybody is different, and I think it's about understanding your teams as well, and who's working in your teams. People can work very differently from one another. So it is very much about understanding the ways of working of your teams, the different needs of your teams as well, and that educational piece, I think, for managers within organisations, to really kind of make sure that everybody's happy, everyone's working to their full potential, but not stressed, not overworked. I think the trust and respect is really key when it comes to teams as well, especially working flexibly and the hybrid working piece. So if you give people, you empower them and you give them the trust to be working from home, you know, you've employed those people, they're working in your teams, and they're there doing a job, and it's about the results of that job, not really kind of being sat in the office at a desk, you know, working long hours. It's making sure that, you know, you're able to support them as a leader within your role. So, for example, some of the techniques that people have used that I've worked with some of the employers, if they are working flexibly, and they might be banging out emails at, say, 9 or 10 o'clock at evening, because that's their choice, they've decided to work at that time, but they might have a little footer on their email saying, you know, I'm working flexibly, I don't expect a response at that time. So they're not setting an example because they're working late, you have to as well. It's kind of drawing that back and making sure that understanding is there for them as well. And also just having policies in place that your employees are aware of, and making sure, you know, if there are policies there to support certain things, that they're aware of it. Like some people have, a couple of organisations I've worked with have, you know, days where they can take to extend their long weekends for like a mental health day, or a day that they can take on a Monday or Friday if they need it. And just making sure that they're aware, and that those are being used as well, because there are some employers out there that are doing some fantastic things, and being really supportive in the workplace. So it's just about making sure that it's aware and leading from the top, really.
Yes, I love the fact that you mentioned a footer there in your email, just so people don't feel like they have to respond back. I can see somebody asking about checking emails at night, especially if you're working from home. How do you shut off and not check your emails at night? And you are right. Sometimes people get the wrong impression. If you're working at night, you're expecting a response, which you are usually not expecting them to respond at that time. We work with a lady who is quite mindful of that, and I realized that she was doing that recently. She sets her emails to go out at certain times because she works in the US. She sets her emails to go out when she knows that we are working within our working hours, instead of sending them during really late evening hours, because she doesn't want us to think we have to respond at that moment in time. So it took us a little while to figure out, like, is she awake? Why is she sending emails at this time? And she said that she was scheduling them to make sure they were reaching us at times during our working hours, which was so mindful, just to be, you know, to make sure that we weren't feeling like we had to, you know, quickly respond to her all the time. But you're right, people don't know that unless you say, or you have a footer, or, you know, that's a really good tip, and that definitely comes from the top down. I'm going to move on quick because we're going to run out of time, and I've got one question that I'm dying to ask about red flags, and a few people in here have actually asked about warning signs because they want to know how whether or not their team is struggling as well. So I'm going to throw it out to the floor about what are some red flags to watch out for that indicate it may be time to reassess or adjust your boundaries in the workplace. Nikki, should we start with you on that one, and then we will go to the rest of the panel? Red flags, how do you know that it's time to reassess or adjust your boundaries in the workplace?
Yeah, I think everyone's going to have different red flags. There's no kind of one set. So think about yourself, what your boundaries are, look at your boundaries if you write them down, and reflect on, are you meeting them? Are you often going against what your boundaries are? And if you are, that's probably a red flag for you personally, to think, have I got them right, or what's happening? And then if you're in a team, you can do practical things like team health, where you do an assessment every kind of couple of weeks and send out a survey for people to fill out to see, how are we feeling as a team? Are we happy? Are we working productively? What are the challenges? And having kind of these team ways to check in with each other. So I think there's different approaches you can take for yourself and for your team.
Yes, definitely. Emma, I can see like you're all going to agree on that one. Is that something that you agree with red flags and adjusting boundaries?
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's going to be slightly different. I think it's important, like you say, to kind of take an indicator of it through kind of either if you do kind of pulse surveys, I need to find out kind of the temperature about how the team are feeling. And what we tend to do is when we see kind of scores on wellbeing go down or something kind of looking kind of awry, then we would obviously have that discussion and find out what's the root of that and what can we do to address it. But I often want to kind of make the point really clear that we want that to be on people take that responsibility for themselves as well, because I think there's often this, and I think someone put something about it in the chat about kind of Gen Z and how generationally we're all kind of a bit different, but the expectation that kind of the workplace has the responsibility for your well-being. Of course, we want to do everything to support our employees' well-being. We have well-being days quarterly. We want to encourage it. But I also want to make sure employees feel really kind of empowered to champion it for themselves. And actually, if they feel like something is not quite right, knowing that they can make those adjustments and that is really kind of a responsibility that they need to share with us. That isn't something that we're not always going to have the right kind of solution for everyone, so therefore everyone's a bit different. Like, think about what it is that you need that's going to make kind of you more productive in the workplace. We talk a lot about kind of supporting both the personal and the professional person, because we need to know the whole you to enable you to be the best you can be, and that can only happen if you kind of help understand what it is that you need to kind of really fill up your cup and give you the energy to kind of to be the best you can be in the workplace.
Yeah, I can see that question about Gen Z. It's a really interesting conversation about whether things are changing now, and Gen Z might be better at setting boundaries. But you're right, there's always that balance between employer and employee, and what your employer can offer you and what you still have to set for yourself. So yeah, it is a fine balance, even if Gen Z are a little bit better about setting boundaries. Hazel, yourself, do you have any red flags that you think people should watch out for when it's time to kind of readjust what things look like for you in the workplace?
I think just echoing really what Nicola and Emma have said, and I think if it makes you feel uncomfortable, or there's something that then makes that working day a little bit more uncomfortable, or it's I know I've said it before, but everybody is slightly different, and what works for one doesn't always work for another. So it's very personal, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And for some people, those pink flags might turn into red flags, so we say. So it is very personal, and also one point I was thinking about earlier is it's not always in the workplace, those boundaries either. Sometimes when you're working from home, that can be family boundaries as well, if you do work from home, and whether you have your family know your working hours and when they can contact you, and that you have your work environment, and that sometimes family need to know those boundaries as well, and that can also be an awkward conversation that you have to navigate as well. But you're right, it is very it's personal, depending on the person and who they work for and how they work. Steve, yourself, last point for the webinar, do you have any red flags that you watch for?
I just get grumpy when I know my boundaries.
Then it's time.
Yes, then I know, yeah, and you can sense it building up over a few days. Everyone is different, as Hazel pointed out. Like, for me personally, like, I get a sense of when I'm, I guess, working beyond my capacity. Like, I do get grumpy and a bit snappy, and I do get out on less walks during the day, and like I feel like I don't have enough time for my mental well-being to catch up with where it needs to be. And obviously when you're trying to look for signs with people you're working with. You're looking at maybe changes in behavior. You're looking at, or do I look at when people are sending Teams messages and emails, like, and what times they're sending them, because often that's an indicator about when they might be working, such as that. And I guess when you start to see these things, and I think it was Emma that mentioned it previously, is like, to take a mental health day is a completely good choice to do, and no one should feel bad about doing it. I do it fairly regularly, as and when I need to, on an ad hoc basis, and that is a legitimate thing to do if you feel that's what you need to reset and realign with things. And you know, every organization I'm sure has a number of like mental health support initiatives ongoing. I think every organization should have them, and employees really should make the most of them, like I do here at Capco. I know people do as well. And yeah, we should recognize when it's happening, and then not be afraid to take action to resolve those situations.
Yeah, that's really good advice, to at least set aside a day for yourself, and find a mental health day, and to recognize as well, before you get to that point where you're feeling like you're burning out, or you're thinking about jumping ship, you just might think, you know what, I might just need a day to myself, and then figure out from there. We are already out of time. I could keep talking to you for all afternoon on this panel, but it has flown by. So thank you so much to Nikki, Steve, Emma, and Hazel. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you all. For everybody listening, thank you so much for joining us. You can go over to shecancode.io to sign up for more webinars. We would love to see you on there, and lots of wonderful resources for you as well. If you haven't already, join our community at community.shecancode.io. There is a link in the chat as well, and we would love to see you in our community. This recording as well will go on shecancode.io from tomorrow. So if you want to see it again or share around, please do share it amongst your networks. But for now, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to our wonderful panel, and we hope to see you on the next webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.